this message needs to be preached by great orators and even people like me. It deserves to be proclaimed because it's God's message.
Hi there. Welcome to the Gary Wilkerson Podcast. I am Gary Wilkerson, and as usual, we have Joshua West in the podcast studio with us here at World Challenge, and we are grateful to have you. Thanks for coming along again, Joshua.
Glad to be part.
Yeah, we've been doing this podcast for a good number of months now, and I feel like we're really hitting on all cylinders and blessing people's lives, bringing instruction from the Word of God, stirring up hearts and passions for Jesus. So looking forward to more of this in the Lord tarry in months and years to come. But last episode, you were graciously kind enough to interview me. I hope that went well. And now I get to turn the tables and share a little bit about your life. And we're doing this because it's, sometimes it's almost like a pastor in the pulpit, and week after week, he gives the exposition of the word, but you don't really know him. And so we're just taking one episode each just so that we could be more in relationship with you, that you get to know us and our hearts a little bit. So we're going to dig right into this and get an interview here with Pastor Joshua West. Joshua, you've been in the ministry for a good number of years now, even though you're a very young man. You got it right after, didn't you?
I think the term "very young man" is in proximity to where you find yourself.
Me, yeah.
So to some people, but yeah, 45 years old. I think one of the right after coming to faith, I wasted so much of my life before Christ, or felt like that I did, that, I just wanted to spend the rest of my life, using it to honor God in some way.
Yeah. Well, you are in the ministry now, a strong ministry, powerful preacher, great writer. You share with us at our pastors' conferences and preach all around the world as well, and get invitations here and there. But that wasn't always your life. You had some trials and tribulations, difficulties you went through before you met Christ. What was your life like post Christian? Pre. Sorry, pre.
No, yeah, I just want to make sure I understood.
You still using drugs now that you got saved? Or, yeah.
No, not recently. Just grew up in broken home. It's not a excuse or anything like that. A great mom. She worked really, really hard. Probably. Any work ethic I have was learned by watching her, as just being such not only a hard worker, but an excellent worker. Everything she did to the best of her ability. But being in a place where your mom works 3 jobs, you kind of left to yourself a lot. And, the truth is, we all are born into sin. And I just watered mine from a very early age. And I think the story of my life, if you want to simplify it, is I fell in love with music at a very early age, and music was like an escape for me. I loved the way it made me feel. I loved to put my headphones on, listen to the songs that were, telling the story of my heart, and really just wanted to make other people feel that way. It was kind of like a drug for me, really, and later became an idol. But, one of the things about the music world is many of the people I idolized were drug addicts and, heroin addicts, Jimi Hendrix, Jim Morrison, and really glamorized that. And so for me, I wasn't like a good kid who got brought in by the bad influence. I was looking for the bad influence. And I think, deep down, that's my sort of thoughts on a surface level. Deep down, though, was insecure and alone, and had a lot of inner struggles. Kind of grew up with a mindset that don't really make trouble. Like hey, I'm not feeling very good about this, or I'm afraid. There really wasn't a lot of room or time for that. We're all kind of working hard to survive. So you learn how to internalize a lot of things, and just not to tell a whole long version of my testimony, but began to use drugs socially on the weekends. And by the time I was a young adult, was selling drugs to support my habit, and full-fledged drug addict, and crossed every boundary I set for myself. I'll do these drugs, but I won't do the hard drugs, or I'll do the hard drugs, but I won't take them intravenously. And just like all sin, it's progressive, and eventually took control of my life. But, I like to say it's the catalyst that God used to show me my weakness and my desperateness for him.
Mm-hmm. Then something happened, obviously, to change that direction. What was that all about?
Yeah, it really started. So I didn't tell you this, but I did go to a Christian school, like almost like I wasn't really smart like the guy in Good Will Hunting.
Okay.
But I was. My mom actually cleaned the Christian school so we could go to it,
wow.
which was a little embarrassing. And I thought I was a good athlete. I wanted to go to the public school so I could play, sports with there or whatever. But anyways, there was this foundational work that was done by being Christian educated, where I understood the chronology of the Bible and the major stories of the Bible, and I understood, that Jesus died for sinners and all of this. And really just hoped that saying a prayer to God and then living for myself would work out in the end, because I had no desire to really live for God. And but when I was in jail in 2001 for about a year for violating a probation that I was on, was the first time that the Word of God actually spoke to me. The book of Romans, actually. Even in my office to this day, I have a picture with the entire book of Romans written on it, because it was the first time I just felt that God was speaking to me, like it was real, like the wrath of God's being stored up for me, and that no one's good, no, not one. And even though I didn't understand so much of the depths of Romans, the basic picture of God is holy, I'm sinful. And what was really the big revelation wasn't just me, the drug addict guy, like everybody, like we're all hopeless, and then really saw the gospel of grace for what it was, and gave my life to God. Was going to follow God wholeheartedly. Came out of jail, did not have the roots or the ability to stand up, fell back into addiction, but but knew something I didn't know before. Mm-hmm. I mourned it. I would get high and I couldn't get high enough, and I felt bad, and I would try really hard to live for God, and then I would fall. And so I knew something I didn't know before, and so I think it was the Spirit of God, that was, now I wasn't mourning the consequences of my sin. I was mourning the fact that I was a sinner, and eventually that a few years of struggling led me through the doors of Teen Challenge. And that's where I really was able to learn who God was, spend time in Christian discipleship, find freedom from addiction, grow some roots, and really, God just burned the gospel in my heart, and I wanted to share it with every person that I met, because I was just blown away, like how many people supposedly had this, but they just didn't seem very interested to share it. And so to me, it was like, just a passion that God put in. And then eventually that sort of morphed into not just sharing the gospel, but sharing this word. And so, became a lifelong student of the Bible, and, just went to Bible college, seminary. God blessed me with a wonderful wife. And, we planted a church in Ennis, Texas, and we're part of that for a long time. I didn't tell you this. In Bible college, I was a youth pastor. I think we both were youth pastors at some point. It's probably the worst youth pastor in the world, because I was very driven by I've got to reach them where they are. And so I was kind of attracted to a lot of gimmicks and stuff. I was immature. But youth pastored, me and my wife have worship pastored, planted a church, and then spent a good chunk of my ministry going back to Teen Challenge to pastor a Teen Challenge in a school of ministry. And really, like you, I felt like I was going to be pastor a traditional church for a long time, but really spent most of my ministry pastoring men who were coming out of addiction. It's the same thing, just in a slightly different context. Right. But yeah, that's kind of the story of with a lot of little details here or there, but that's kind of the story.
Yeah. In stories like yours, I'm always thrilled to see the personal work that the power of God can do in your life, but the impact it has around you as well. So, you came from a broken home, but yet here you are now in a very healthy marriage. You have a little fellow there. How old is he now? He's 17 months. 17 months.
Yep.
It was just brilliant family. We go to the same church together, you and your family and me and my family. And, you're an elder there now and helping lead worship, but also leading World Challenge Pastors Network and writing and doing, so it's incredible. It's not like God just saved somebody so that they could live a moderately normal life, rid of negatives. He brings so much good into our life, so much positive. Just as I had a son who was in addiction as well, and to see him, I don't know what it is about his marriage and children that blesses me so much. I think just knowing how that could have not been the story.
No doubt.
He could have not been a happily married man. He could have not been a father who loves his children so much, and you guys get that joy because of what Jesus has done for you. And then you share it like you become a pastor of a church that has, dozens, if not hundreds of addicts in it that are getting set free. And also you seem to have a gift at taking some young men and mentoring them, bring them along. You did that. I listened to a guy at Sunrise that you used to be the pastor of that's there now, and occasionally I'll listen to one of his sermons. And you raised him up in ministry, and so that's a great gift too. But what would you say? Did you just kind of slip into full-time ministry, or did you have a definitive moment where you just know, okay, this is what I'm called to?
Yeah, I think it's a weird sort of question. So I think very early on, not a weird question you're asking, but it's a weird answer to that question. I believe that God called me into ministry right at the beginning. But what that actually would be would take time for me to come to grips with. So I looked at myself, the things I thought I was good at, and kind of thought, okay, well, I'm a musician, so I'm going to be in a Christian rock band, or I'm going to be in a worship team, or I had other sort of skills, maybe worldly skills, and I thought that God would use that. And I think very early on, God had put on my heart to preach, but he had also put a weight on my heart of reverence for God's word. And so I couldn't see myself preaching. Now I could see myself telling my testimony, look what Jesus has done. He can do it for you too. God so loved the world. That part was easy for me, but the idea of preaching God's word, I think that's one of the things that led me not just to, I don't study God's word just to preach, but I think it took me on this journey of understanding if I'm going to communicate the thus saith the Lord, that I'd better study to show myself approved. And simultaneously, God used that to mature me. But I think that's kind of was the path for me. And there did come a point, before we entered into ministry where I felt called, and, I took that step of faith, feeling, like I'd known so many great ministers and preachers and orators that don't have a lot of confidence in, my own speaking ability or any of that. And so I think for me, it was just the weight of God's word eventually just overflowing out of me to the point where, and at some point I realized that, I don't have to know everything, but this needs to be preached. I feel like the weight of ministry for me has been, like the Romans 10 passage. How will they know if a preacher doesn't? How will someone go if they're not sent? How beautiful are the feet that bring the message of the good news of the gospel? And so I think it was more of like the urgency of realizing that not only did God call me to preach, but this message needs to be preached by great orators and even people like me. It deserves to be proclaimed because it's God's message. Beautiful. And I think that's kind of, in spite of shortcomings and growing pains and stuff, I think that a reverence for God's word at the beginning kept me from it, but eventually plunged me into this idea that, and since then, I know for a fact that that's what God has put me on earth to do, and whether be doing it from a stage at World Challenge or, in a coffee shop with a couple of young men, that message needs to be proclaimed. And so,
That's so good. Do you have a specific calling? I mean, it sounds like you're talking about preach the word, evangelism. Are those things that early on in your ministry you felt like, like when you asked me in the last podcast, I was telling you about the two things, the Jeremiah 9, knowing God, and church planting that became an early part. Are there certain specifics about your particular call from the Lord? Yeah,
I think, if there's anything that marks the passion, the sort of thrust of everything I do, first and foremost, is to proclaim the Jesus of the Bible. Obviously to point people towards Christ. But I think not more importantly that, but in support of that, is preaching biblical truth, encouraging others to do the same. I think if there was a scripture that marks my life, it would be 2 Timothy 4:1-5. The idea of, because we will stand before God, the Christ who will judge the living and the dead, that God has called us, who he's called to be ministers, to preach the word and to do it in season and out of season, to correct, rebuke, and encourage. I think for me, my ministry, I think, is to not only to preach God's word, but to equip others to rightly divide God's word, and really to push people towards God's word. It's not really a complicated thing or even a special calling. It's proclaiming the truth of God's word. And I think the way that's manifest in ministry, like when I was pastoring a teen challenge, we started a school of ministry, not because we just wanted to, but because not only did we want to raise these men up who were called, who felt the call of God in their life, but we wanted to equip them to look to preach this. And I think if there's anything that I am most encouraged by, is seeing, like you said previously, people turning back to this. I think, and so that's why that is what's pushed my academic studies. That's what pushes my style of preaching. Is not, and here's the thing: I don't say this as some sort of expert. I'm a student of this. I'm subjected to this. I'm just a student myself, but I also, I want to preach God's word. I want to help people rightly interpret God's word. I want people to make this the centerpiece of their church and their preaching. And I think that's what all of my writing, all of my ministry kind of has that vein, Christ as revealed in the scripture.
Amen. Yeah, it's very clear when you preach too. It comes across very strongly and passionately. That was one of the things that when we were looking for somebody to come work with us at World Challenge to help with pastors and preach, your messages, the clarity and the centrality of the gospel. And speaking of that, so you, there are some ministries and ministers that, they graduate from high school and they start preaching and they just have, my father was one of them. He went to 1 year Bible college, but he had a depth of knowledge of the Word of God because he absorbed in it. But there's others that God calls into, maybe to take a little bit more academic approach to things, and the Lord led you into that. So you did Bible school, graduated from there, and then went to seminary, correct?
Yep, seminary.
Graduated from that with that would be a master's, or what would you call that?
So I got a master's of divinity,
right.
And then a master's of theology.
Okay.
And so the master of divinity is kind of like the master's degree equivalent of an MBA for pastors. Traditionally, that's what a lot of pastors in certain denominations would get. But those two are the degrees that I hold other than a bachelor's degree.
And then now you're studying for your doctorate as well, right?
Yeah.
What are you doing your dissertation on?
The same thing we're writing our book on.
Okay,
would be recovering biblical faith.
Beautiful.
And focusing on the idea that that the word pistis in the New Testament most times, and even if it's talking about faith for something, is rooted in faith in someone. And that's my argument is going to be that's what Hebrews 11 is talking about, the faith, not faith that you'll get out of this situation, or faith. It's all connected back to God and connected back to the Word of God. Just since you asked, I'll tell you the faith, to me, I believe the Bible teaches that faith, ultimately, the faith is knowing that we stand justified before God on the basis of Christ, and that God will keep the promises He made in His Word. And so we have to discern what those promises are, and we have to set our affection and our trust in Christ. And that's really the root of biblical preaching. And so for me, just one thing you said about your dad, I, want to make one thing clear is, even though your dad didn't go to, 7 or 8 years of Bible college, and maybe I needed that because, I learned differently, or God had a slightly different path for me. But I've never met a man who was a powerful minister of God's word who wasn't a student.
Right.
Your dad had books, pastor, other pastors. I was sitting in Jim Cymbala's office one day and, just looking around at this, he didn't study in Bible college, but he's a student of God's word and has on his own learned how to rightly divide and discern this thing. Obviously, we do all this, but the main teacher obviously is the Spirit of God who leads us into all truth. But I don't think those two things should be pitted against each other. And academic pursuit for me isn't. I don't consider myself a theologian or don't have any desire to be a scholar who, with a font. I love those men. I appreciate their work, but the guy that's like taking the tiniest little thing with theology and developing that out. I just want to be the best preacher I can be, who rightly divides the word of truth and teaches others to do it. And so that's the only reason I think theology is, can be used for, puffing up yourself with knowledge. But I want to know God and I want to help others know God. And so for me, that's been an avenue to do that.
Yeah. No, I think it's important. I think the problem comes when you glory in one another. So people that glory in their academic pursuit and look down upon people who have not, finished school or whatever.
Right.
And then the opposite's true too. Like there is sometimes in some maybe more old school churches, sort of like, they call it the seminary, they call it the cemetery.
Right.
And there was like a denouncement of higher education, which I think is very improper. And, that's let God call people into, starting without it or to go get it and do well in it. And, I think if you have the right mindset going into that and the right school you go to, if God leads you to the right place, you come out more able to divide the word of God correctly. And that, I'm glad you're doing that. I'm glad but besides getting input from educators, you also help give input to others by writing. So you've written three books now, right?
Yeah.
And working on your fourth. We're doing that together. Tell me about your three books. Give me the titles first.
So the first book I ever wrote was called Simple Gospel, Modern Offense of the Cross. My second book, and I guess the one that's had the most, commercial success, is called Hard Sayings, Reconciling the Cost of Discipleship in the American Dream.
Beautiful.
And then the last book that I wrote, which you actually wrote the foreword for very graciously, is called Come and Die, Dying to Self and Living for Christ.
Start with the first one, Simple Gospel. What's the premise of it?
Yeah, that book it's pretty self-explanatory, but I honestly did not set out to write a complete book. I was pastoring men, and it was just shocking to me. Many men who grow up in church and around churches who just didn't understand the gospel. I mean, I think that's one of the biggest problems in the world today. And so what I wanted to do was just to write a little sort of pamphlet called The Simple Gospel. And I just basically highlighted the prophecies of Jesus and how he fulfilled the Old Testament prophecies, perfect life, substitutionary atonement in the cross, his vicarious resurrection, and what that means for us. I just wanted to articulate the gospel so the men under my care would have a resource. But as I wrote what ended up being chapter 4 for Simple Gospel, I was like, well, but then I need to also address this. And so then it kind of turned into a book. After about, I wrote the second chapter, I was like, I need to outline a book. And so I outlined a book, and long story short, God, put me in touch with someone who was in publishing, and I just wanted to ask their advice about publishing a book, and my hope was that I could just use it for Teen Challenge and stuff like that. And she actually told me that I wanted her to edit my book, and she's used to work for Thomas Nelson and all sorts of other people. So she was a friend of a friend. And so she said, well, I don't really have time to read your book, but I'll skim it and I'll point you in the right direction. And then she called me back and she said, this is a good book. I want to make it. And so, from that, it kind of launched, I guess a writing career. But the truth is, it also did something in me. I realized just how powerful the written word really is. The idea of there's these books. Not that my book's on this level, but these books that next to the Bible, obviously supplementary, but that just stand the test of time because their message is very tied to this. It opens our eyes to this. And so for me, it just kind of birthed something new in me where and writing really has been not only something that I want to share with people. It's been a personal development, as typically my writing has been as I'm studying deeply about something, preaching sermons through something that I'm like, this could be a book, and so they haven't all taken the same form. But Simple Gospel is a book about the gospel, what it is, what it isn't. You could consider my writing plagiarism because probably 1/3 of each of my books is scripture citations because I'm trying to explain it the best. And then Hard Sayings really was a book that I wanted to dig a little deeper into the idea that, I'd meet so many people who are spiritual but not religious, or lukewarm sort of surface mainstream Christians who would have problems with the Bible or concepts like hell, but they loved Jesus. And I wanted to take the opportunity to really expose what the teachings of Jesus is and who the Jesus of the Bible is. And the context I did that is, the Hard Sayings, of course we know the passage of John that comes from, but reconciling the cost of discipleship and the American dream. What do we do with the parts of Christian life that don't fit into our American context or into our life in general? And obviously the answer is those things are laid down. And so that book resonated with people for some degree, I think possibly because of the rise of, maybe some more nationalistic views of Christianity, like, you've mentioned before, getting back to the 1950s rather than God's kingdom coming and God's will being done. And then just briefly, my last book, Come and Die, was I really wanted to, so both of those books, the first two books, I kind of pitted the Bible against culture. And I really just wanted to write a book that encouraged people in Christian discipleship. And so it's not an exhaustive book. I deal with some things that I feel other books may not deal with quite as much. And one of them being the concept of justification, sanctification, and how we walk out the Christian life. And so, yeah, that's my writing, and I don't see any time I'm going to stop in the future, even if people stop buying the books. For me, the writing of them is something that has been very is growing.
Yeah, you're extremely gifted at it, and you do it well, and you do it quick. We're working on a book together, and you have a certain amount of chapters more than I have, and you've already tripled up on. You're almost done, and I'm just getting on to my second chapter. So you're definitely a mover. I'm encouraged about that. I like that. I think the Lord will give you a good number of more books as He continues to speak to you, that you'll share that, and they're all very Christ-centered and front right from the Word too. It's if somebody's hungry to have the Word more clearer in their life, your books could be like you said, alongside of that, just under the Word, but speaking to the Word as well. Then so you joined World Challenge here a little over a year ago, and you're head of not only preaching and teaching and writing and doing a series here on Romans, and those are available through our ministry as well at World Challenge. I highly recommend that. But you're head of the Pastors Network. And so we have the conferences that we're doing in America and around the world. We have then ministry that goes out to pastors. Can you take a few minutes to explain what we're doing with that ministry and why, and what's your heart about that?
Yeah, I think it's for me, it's something I'm very excited to do, and really just grateful to be part of this ministry. I know this isn't exactly what you asked, but being able to be part of a ministry that has encouraged me, corrected me, taught me, for so many years, as someone just who partook, through online sermons and written materials and things like that, to be able to come be a contributor, in a ministry that I think is so biblical and gospel-centered, Christ-centered is a huge honor. And, so I'm very thankful. I think one of the things with the Pastors Network, we have to be realistic. We can't be, we're not here to replace the church. We're not here to, you can't replace personal, real relationships with people. But, what we do with pastors' conferences, what God has laid on your heart about ministering to, people who are in ministry, it's just so potent and powerful. And so I think the hope is, without over-promising or pretending like this is going to be something that it's not, it's kind of just taking that a level deeper, kind of connecting people with our ministry on a level deeper, and really being able to just encourage them in a level that's just for pastors. I think the platform is aimed at, there's so many things on World Challenge that are really just aimed at the church at large, which is so necessary and important, but really just speaking to the heart of not just the trials and tribulations that pastors go through, but biblical corrections, biblical rebukes, biblical encouragements, and dealing with the life as a pastor. And so the hope is that there would be sort of three streams on the pastor's platform for the Pastors Network. One would be that it's, has some educational stuff in there that helps people, that's instructional, and, with us, and then even ministry partner friends that we have who, are connected with us, being able to share their wisdom and their experience on there. The middle stream would be that of encouragement, and encouragement, like you said before, is correction, rebuke, and encouragement. It's the sort of inspirational side of dealing, right? It's basically like writing some of these newsletters, written materials, instead of aimed at the church at large, it's aimed at pastors. And then there's the conversational and connective side. Conversational being talking through issues in the church, talking through issues as a pastor, talking about things in the culture, and then connecting with them in a more significant way. And I think that not just connecting them in a one-sided stream with our ministry, but connecting biblical pastors with each other, because there is strength in unity. And I think as long as we're unified in the truth, that unity is something to be sought after. The Bible talks about it over and over again. So there's much more to that, but it really is just a deeper connection with pastors across the country and around the world who are hungry to grow, hungry for encouragement, hungry for more of Jesus, and for us to stand together and, bear each other's burdens. And I think one of the biggest things is learning from the experience and trials and tribulation and wisdom of others. And so I won't be the only voice on there, it'll be yours and many other people as we kind of have this collective together. Yeah,
it's been a joy not only to do conferences where there's, like 2,000 pastors in Mexico or 600 in California, but to have a group of guys that you just know a little bit better. Yeah. And, we here at World Challenge aren't part of a denomination. And a lot of churches are in the same situation. They don't have a network that's readily available to them through their denomination. So it has to be built on relationships. So that's probably where we have a little bit more opportunity to help serve pastors that definitely we're not a network. We're not we're not a denomination. We're not even really a fellowship, but right. We are relationally driven to help one another and serve one another. And it really started, these connections we have, it was interesting when we were at the Fire in Our Bones conference in San Diego. I was there representing World Challenge on our team, you and others. Nikki Cruz was, representing sort of the Cross and Switchblade. Sonny Arganzoni was there. You're a Teen Challenge graduate. Ron Brown, the director of Southern California Teen Challenge, 60 years in Teen Challenge in California. So there, Victory Outreach with Sonny Arganzoni. We had, and also Times Square Church, right. The leaders of Times Square Church, the Summit Bible School. All of these sort of like the father and the grandfather of this is my father. But to see all the sons and grandsons and great-grandsons and granddaughters in the ministry there in one setting. But none of that was formal. Nobody signed contracts or took a pledge. It was just they built a relationship on like-mindedness and wanting to serve Christ and the same message. Really, a message is what drove it all. Is like we want that message of the no compromise gospel. And so that gathered that. So basically that's continued. These ministries are still friends. Others have joined in. Just we have a great friend up there in Indiana and all around the nation. Just guys that have their hearts and ours have been knit together.
Louisiana.
Yeah, down Louisiana.
California. I mean, there's several ministries that have connected.
Yeah, and it's growing. And so, maybe if you're listening today and you're a pastor, you want to find out more information, you can contact Joshua here at. Can I give you your email address?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, Joshua.
It's actually jwest at worldchallenge.org.
Yeah, so you can reach out to him personally, and he'll get right back with you. Or we'll put some more information in the show notes about World Challenge and how you can reach out to that. But if you're not a pastor, maybe you'll want to just slip this information, forward this podcast to them, and let them hear a little bit more about it. So, well, Joshua, thank you for sharing your story. As we said in these past two podcasts, one you interviewed me, now where I interview you, we're departing from our normal, the thing we love most. Neither of us love talking about ourselves. I think that's more difficult than anything else. We don't shy back from that because we have a testimony. We're grateful.
Sure.
And, Jesus told the story of who he was. Paul said, I was this and I did that and I was a Pharisee. And, so nothing wrong with sharing our testimonies. But, normally we are, and just if you're just new to our podcast, normally we'll take some biblical issues and try to dig deep into it and bring the simple gospel, but an uncompromised gospel as well. A lot of our resources are available at worldchallenge.org, and we also have some books that are on there. Fire in His Bones has just been released this month, and we would love for you to check that book out. You can find it anywhere books are sold. Joshua, thanks again for being with us. Your books are also available anywhere you can find books.
Yeah, they're available everywhere books are sold. They're also available at worldchallenge.org's bookstore. So
check out his sermons at World Challenge and pick up his books there at World Challenge or wherever you buy your books. So thank you again for being with us. God bless you. Well, I hope you'll join us again. Hey, one more thing. Would you be willing to subscribe to our podcast? We would love to do that. And if you have any comments, if you want to give a review about who we are and what we're doing, if we've been a blessing to you, that would be great. It helps expand the word that can go to other people. If you're getting blessed, we pray that other people would be blessed just the way you are as well. Pray for us as well, that God would continue to preach the gospel through us. We have a team going to India here soon, doing a pastor's conference with 1,000 pastors there. And then very soon we'll be in some other places, New York City in August. So a lot happening, and we would appreciate your prayers. God bless you. Have a wonderful day.
Each week, this podcast reaches thousands of listeners. This critical work is made possible by the generous contributions of individuals like you who believe in the mission of World Challenge. Thank you for listening and supporting. World Challenge, transforming lives through the message and mission of Jesus Christ. Visit us online at worldchallenge.org.